Masechet Sotah, Daf Vav. We have two main topics today. The first one is about chalitza, and the second one is about eating terumah. So the Mishnah mentioned that if a man accuses his wife and she becomes a Sotah, and then before the process is finished, he dies without children, leaving a surviving brother. That surviving brother may not do yibum. He must do chalitza. So we're going to ask why. Veimet holeset amai titjabem name yabume. Why not? Yes, okay. When she becomes a sotah, she's prohibited to her husband. But now he died, and so why can't she go do yibum and uphold the name of the deceased, right? And go ahead and be married to the brother. אמר רב יוסף, אמר קרא ויצאה מביתו, והלכה והייתה לאיש אחר ולא ליבם. Now we're going to learn it from this context in Devarim. Let's look at it. This is a context about a divorce and the prohibition against remarrying after divorce if a wife marries in between. In other words, like this: if a man marries a woman, and this is the key. This is why we're using this context and connecting it to Sotah, because this first husband divorced his wife because of some kind of advat davar. He found some kind of sexual impropriety. So let's assume that's like Sotah, and gave her a get and sent her out. And then she goes, v'yatzami beto, she leaves the first husband, v'alcha v'ayta le'ish acher, and she goes and marries a different person altogether, ish acher. And so that's the key that we're doing, just to fill out the context. If the second husband ends up not liking her and divorces her, she cannot go back to the first husband, right? If there was nobody in between, then yeah, if they're not a kohen, a couple can get divorced, and then they make up, they can get remarried. But if she marries someone else in the meantime, she cannot go back to her first husband. Okay, so from this law here, we have the case of Sotah, Edvat Davar, and she goes and marries someone else. So we learn from this, yes, she can marry someone else, another man, not related, but she cannot marry the Yavam. That's how we learn it. Abaye asks Rav Yosef, hold on, if she's not permitted to marry her brother-in-law, the Yavam, then they should not require Chalisa either. Right? Chalisa is when there's an option to do Yibum, but they refuse, so he does Chalisa instead. But if there's a prohibition and not allowed to do Yibum, then he should be off the hook and not have to do chalisa either. Amar le, Rav Yosef answers, Ilu iteh laba'al bila baya get, hashtaname tibae chalisa. And Rav Yosef answers that, wait a second, if the husband was alive, even though she's a sotah status and they're not allowed to be living together, nevertheless, she requires a get, right? Even though she's a sotah, she can't remarry somebody else until she gets a get. Therefore, their marriage is still a living bond, and therefore, when the husband dies, the yibum there will be a zikah of yibum. Yes, they're not allowed to go through with yibum because of that derasha, but just like the husband would still have to give a get, certainly the Yavam would have to do Halisa in order for her to go and remarry. All right, that's all one version of the discussion. We're going to see two more versions of the discussion between Rav Yosef and Abaye. V'tamre Amar Rav Yosef. All three versions are very similar, just slight different nuances in how exactly their argument goes. Rachamana Amar v'yasami beto v'alcha v'ayta le'ish acher, quoting the same pasuk. Tela listere lebete ve'at amar titjabem name yabume. She must leave her home. What does that mean? Why should she have to leave her home? So that his house not be destroyed by continuing to be with this wife. In other words, the first husband who saw Edvat Davar, let's assume that's a Sotah. He sees this woman is problematic. She is not faithful. So she must leave her home because she's a dangerous influence in the home. And now you're going to tell me she should go do yibum and uphold the name of the deceased, stay within the family? No, we don't want to hear it all. So we're focusing on the viatza mi beto. And so if she has to leave her husband, so certainly we don't want her to with the Yavam either. Okay. Amar le Abaye, that's what she has to chalitza and not ibum. Amar le Abaye, ele me'ata le'acher lo tinase de la tistere lebete. Abaye says, if that's the case, if she is such a improper woman and cannot be trusted, then she should not be able to marry anyone, even someone who's not related at all. Right? She's a tistere, a homewrecker. So don't let her marry anybody at all. Amale mi karamenan la ale be'al korche. Rav Yosef, no, it's different. Are we forcing anybody to marry against his will? It's different from the Yavam. The Yavam, in general, in a regular case, has an obligation, right? It's a mitzvah, and we shame him if he doesn't do it. Okay, so for the Yavam, who has an obligation, we're going to say, listen, Yavam, you don't have an obligation. She's a homewrecker. Don't do it, right? So we advise the Yavam to do chalitza. That's fine. But if it's a third party, we're assuming everybody knows, small villages, everybody knows what's going on. Right? So some other guy, knowing her past, he decides he's going to marry her, so we don't have to stop her from marrying anybody in the world. That's his decision. He thinks that, he could, for some reason, have a good relationship and build a nice family. Okay, good luck to him. But we're not going to force a Yavam to do it, and therefore the yibum is off the table. Do chalitza. That's second. Third version of the discussion between the same two sages. Vika de Amre Amar Rav Yosef hakatuv kera'o acher she'en ben zugo shel rishon sheze hotzi resha'a mibeto veze hechnis resha'a letoch beto v'at amart tityabem name yabume. Rav Yosef says the source for this law is from that same pasuk which calls the second husband acher, meaning a foreigner, right? Separate. No, it doesn't call him the second husband. It calls him another man. Like you say, Elohim acherim. It's a derogatory term. What's bad? What's foreign about him? He is not the peer of the first husband. They're not on equal status. How do you know that? Because look, the first husband sends away this wicked woman from his home, and the second husband says, "I'll take her." What kind of man does that, right? Why would he take a woman who is now has a bad reputation? So therefore, since the second husband, in the context of Devarim, that's talking about first husband that sees Edvat Tavad and calls the second husband low life, basically. So would you say that he has an obligation to do yibum, right? If the second husband is a low life, why we're not going to make it a mitzvah for someone? Very similar to the previous version of Rav Yosef. Okay. Amar le Abaye, ela me'ata niset la'acher umet belo banim lo titchabem da katuv kera'o acher. Abaye asks a question. What if you have a case like in that Torah in the case of Devarim, where her first husband sees a problem with her, divorces. She marries a second guy, and then let's say the second husband dies without children. So would you say? But the second guy, she was faithful totally. There's no problems with the second marriage. Would you say that the brother of the second husband cannot do yibum because it calls the second husband acher? He is a lowlife, and now, right, the yavam is going to be a lowlife marrying this wicked woman. Would you say that? That's not the law, right? There's no halacha like that. We only say that the first husband can, if he dies, his brother cannot do yibum. That's the law of Sotah. Once she's Sotah, she doesn't do yibum. But once they're out of the picture, she's married to a second guy. And there was never a problem, not a Sotah with the second guy. So there's no law like that. She does do yibum with the second guy's husband, her second guy's brother. So why don't you apply the same thing, that he's called wicked? So don't be in place of that wicked person and take this wicked wife. No, no, it's different. Regarding with the second husband, she lived properly and a good name and a good reputation, right? So she fixed her image. So that's totally fine. So therefore, everything makes sense. Regarding the first husband, where The first husband had reason to suspect her and kicked her out of the house, and she was a wicked woman. And so who would marry her? Only an acher. So we're not going to put the first husband's brother in that place and tell him, you have to be Mr. Acher and marry a wicked woman. So therefore, for the first husband, no. But once she gets married and she has a proper relationship without any suspicion at all, and that second husband should die, then she can do yibum. Now she turns over a new leaf from that point on. Okay, good. That all is three versions of Rav Yosef. And now we're going to see another answer altogether by Rava. Amar, Kal v'chomer im nesra bamutar la, ba'asur la lo kol sheken. If she is prohibited from he who is permitted to her, meaning her husband, right? Her husband was permitted to her. They got married, they had a beautiful wedding and everything. But then she was a Sotah and became prohibited to him. So if the husband who was permitted totally now became prohibited because of the Sotah law, the brother-in-law, who is generally prohibited, right? That's one of the adayot. If they have children, or in a standard case, or while the husband is alive, then their husband's brother is prohibited. So for someone who is generally one of the adayot, all the more so, now that she became a sotah, is going to be totally prohibited. Okay, so Rava makes sense. This is just a basic kal vachomer. She can't be with her husband, then certainly she can't go and marry her husband's brother, which is much more difficult to permit. The whole law of yibum is a special exception to adayot. So we're not going to make the special exception when she can't even be with her husband. Okay, Amar le'Abaye, Abaye is challenging everybody today. Ela me'ata kohen gadol shekideshet almana umet v'yesh lo ach kohen hedyot lo titjabem im ne'esra bamutar la ba'asur la lo kol sheken. Abaye says, I'm going to give you a kal vachomer that's similar to your kal vachomer, but that leads to an absurd conclusion, an untrue conclusion. And so therefore, I'm going to challenge your kal vachomer. And so here's Abaye's kal vachomer. According to you, right, based on your own logic, let's say a Kohen Gadol does kiddushin with an almana. Kohen Gadol is not allowed to be with an almana. A regular Kohen can, but not a Kohen Gadol. They do kiddushin anyway. Even though it's prohibited, the kiddushin does work. It is chal. And then that Kohen Gadol dies without children, and he has a brother, and the brother is going to do yibum, but this brother is Kohen Hedyot, and the Kohen Hedyot is allowed to marry an almana. So the law is that this Kohen brother would be permitted to do yibum. There's no problem with that. He's not a Kohen Gadol. But according to your logic, you should say a kal vachomer and not allowed, since im ne'esra bamutar la, if she becomes prohibited to he who is generally permitted to her husband, so the brother-in-law, who is generally adayot, all the more so should not do yibum. And why don't I apply the same logic? You see, your kal vachomer is going to lead to false conclusions. Now we ask about this. Abaye, ne'esra ha'asira v'kaima, mutar la, asur lahu. What do you mean when you say that im ne'esra bamutar la, referring to the Kohen Gadol with an almana? That she becomes ne'esra, she became prohibited by what? By marrying him? Asira v'kaima, they were forbidden the whole time, right? That's a forbidden relation. When they're single, it's a forbidden relation. What do you mean mutar la? With permitted, that they were permitted? No, they were forbidden. It's a fundamental forbidden relationship, right? This is not similar to the case of Sotah, where a husband and wife are permitted. Very good, nice couple. And then, during the marriage, she becomes prohibited as a Sotah. That's when he made the kal vachomer. But here, the first couple, Kohen Gadol, is prohibited from the almana from even before they were married. So you can't say that kal vachomer. Ela eshet kohen shene'ensa umet v'yesh lo ach halal lo titjabem im ne'esra bamutar la ba'asur la lo kol sheken. So rather, we're going to change the case of the challenge. So let's see how this is also a similar kavachomer that's going to lead to a false conclusion. But this one fits the logic better. You have a wife of a Kohen, so we're happily married, no problem with that marriage, but this wife tragically is raped during the marriage. The law is that if someone who's married to a Kohen, even though she's raped, no, she didn't do anything wrong, she's still prohibited to a Kohen. That's just the way it is. Okay. And then he dies without children. So at that point, this wife is prohibited to her husband. He dies without children, but so she's going to fall to Yibum to the brother. Now, this brother is a halal, right? He's an illegitimate Kohen, and a halal Kohen is allowed to marry such a woman. So really the halacha should be that it's permitted. But according to your logic, no, you should say, no, don't do yibum, because if she became prohibited, this is now is become, because she was permitted to her husband, she became prohibited at the point of rape, and now she's no longer allowed to live with her husband. So all the more so, ba'asurla, to the brother-in-law, who is one of the arayot, all the more so she should be forbidden. Now, this kavachomer leads to a false conclusion. So what are you going to do about this? And we answer, Ones b'Yisrael mishra shareh, ve'gabe dehai miha leka isura. So no, you can't compare Sotah, which is a universal law. Anyone who is a Sotah is going to be prohibited to her husband. Doesn't matter if they're Kohen or Yisrael or anything. So that's a universal law. Here, the case of ones is not a universal law. If a wife of a Yisrael is raped, she's permitted to remain with her husband. So ones b'Yisrael is permitted. And with regard to this person, the halal, also there's no prohibition. So we're not going to say that just because she became prohibited to her husband, because her husband is a special category of Kohen, we don't apply that kavachomer to a brother for whom that prohibition does not apply, right? That's a specific prohibition only to the husband. And so that doesn't jump over the logic of the kavachomer to someone to whom that prohibition does not apply. Whereas the concept of Sotah applies to everyone equally, and so only there, yes, it does make sense. So we support Rav's kavachomer in the end. It does make sense to say that if a Sotah is prohibited to her husband, then and he originally was permitted. So since that Sotah concept applies equally to the surviving brother, then the surviving brother also will not be able to do yibum. Okay, that ends the first Mishnah, and now we get to the next one. Ve'elu asurot milechol bitruma. At the very end of the previous Mishnah, did mention that a Sotah is no longer allowed to eat teruma if she is a Bat Yisrael and she's married to a Kohen. So while they're married, she depends on him for her food, for her sustenance. If he's a Kohen, the permission to eat teruma transfers to all of his dependents, and certainly including his wife. But that's only as long as they are living together. But now they have to separate, and so she cannot eat teruma anymore while she's a Sotah. If she drinks and she's innocent, then she can go back. Okay, now we're going to list a few more cases of women who are prohibited from eating teruma because of some kind of suspect, because they're suspect of adultery, and they can't be with their husbands. Let's say a woman admits that she is guilty. She comes home, I was unfaithful. So that's it. They have to separate. They cannot eat teruma. We did see a different opinion back in the Darim that says we don't always trust what a woman is saying. Just because she admitted to adultery, maybe she's making it up because she wants a divorce, but it's not necessarily true. Okay, so this Mishnah here, we're assuming that she is believed. Or witnesses came and said, we saw her sin. Okay, once they saw her sin, well, then that's she's a zonah, and she committed adultery, worse. And so she'll certainly have to separate and cannot eat teruma. We're going to focus on this line in the discussion of the Gemara. This is seems so obvious, right? Of course, if two witnesses came, right, that's the classic case of adultery. Okay, ve'amaret eni shotah, or a case of Sotah. Now we already saw once she becomes a Sotah, she can't eat teruma anymore. In some cases of a sotah, she can drink and she'll be okay. But in other cases, she can choose to plead the fifth. She says, I don't want to drink the sotah. Now, it could be because she's guilty and she's afraid of what's going to happen. It could be she's innocent and she doesn't want to go through with the ordeal because it's very shameful. And she's no, I'm not going through with that. Or she's just scared of it, even if she's innocent. It's just like a scary thing. And so a woman can say, listen, I'm not gonna drink. And if that means I'm going to stay in my state as a sotah, and be separated and not eat teruma, so that will be, she won't be able to eat teruma forever. That's something in common in these cases, that she won't be able to eat teruma forever. Or the last two cases, when the husband does something, the husband says, I don't want you to drink. Okay, this husband is flip-flopping, right? At first, he's angry at his wife, he suspects her, he makes her a sotah, right? Brings witnesses, everything, and he engages the sotah status. But then he kind of feels bad. He says, I don't want my wife to be all publicly shamed, and then, no, I don't want her to drink. So now she's kind of stuck because she's a sotah, and she can't prove her innocence by drinking. But anyway, in that case, since she can't drink, but she is sotah, she can't have teruma. And also, if her husband is with her on the way, once she's sotah, they're not allowed to be together. If the husband violates that and is intimate with his wife after she's sotah, this is on the way, like, while they're traveling to Yerushalayim, but it could be anywhere, anytime, then it's prohibited, because the sotah only is effective if he is innocent and only she is guilty. But at this point, he is sinning also, because even though it's with his wife, he's not allowed to be with his wife. And in that case, she can't drink the sotah waters and to prove her innocence either, because he did something wrong, and so, but she's still a sotah, and so she's prohibited from teruma. Okay, that's the Mishnah. All right, the entire Gemara is going to focus on this chidush of Rav Sheshet. So remember, this is Rav Sheshet's rule. We're going to have a lot of questions, challenges to it. Amar Rav Amram, ha mileta amar lan Rav Sheshet v'anhar lan einin mimatnitin. Rav Amram reports that Rav Sheshet taught us the following law, and it opened our eyes to the Mishnah. All right, there's a line in the Mishnah, that line that I mentioned, that's obvious. Now, we said before, Peshita, but now we're going to understand the significance of that line based on Rav Sheshet's new teaching. He says, Sotah sheyesh la edim b'medinat hayam en hamayim bodkim otam. If there's a sotah and there are witnesses that saw her sin, but they're not around in this country, they're somewhere in a different country. That means we probably don't even know about them. But they saw, and then they went away on a trip. In that case, if she drinks, the sotah waters will not be effective. In other words, you have a woman who is guilty and she's going to drink and nothing will happen because there are witnesses elsewhere. The sotah waters will only work in a case where that's no one knows, right? And it's complete doubt. And then the sotah waters do their magic and decide for us. But if it's known, even if it's not known to us in the Beit Din, it's not known to the husband, there's no local witnesses, but someone knows, then it doesn't work. Now, we don't necessarily know that there even are witnesses somewhere else, which means that if the sotah waters don't do anything, we will presume innocence, but if witnesses come one day back and say, oh, listen, we went away, but actually, beforehand, we saw her sin, then we'll know that she is in fact guilty. Okay, the point of this law may be that we don't want the sotah waters to be falsifiable, because let's say she drinks and nothing happens, and then the witnesses come back. What are we going to do? Are we going to say two witnesses, oh, you're wrong, you're lying because you took the sotah waters? Sotah water is so powerful that they're going to go against the number one 100% proof throughout the Torah of two witnesses? So that's a problem. We don't want to do that. And therefore we say, listen, two witnesses, if they ever should come in the future, you will be guilty. And we're fine to say that the sotah waters don't work precisely because it is known somewhere in the world. Okay, my ta'ama, what's the source? Tamar kera, v'nistera, v'hi nitma'a, v'aed en ba. Regarding sotah, it says that the husband didn't know, and nistera, she was secluded, and she became tameh, and there was no witness. Deleka de'adaba. No one knows about it. There is no witness. Not only that there's no witness that came to court, there is no witness in existence. But this excludes a case where there's two witnesses in some other country that they know about it. If it's known by anyone, Sotah waters won't work. Okay, now that's what Rav Sheshet said. That's his chidush. We're going to talk about it a lot, and here's how it relates to the Mishnah. There are two edim emat inema mikame dishte zonahi ela lebetar dishtai. And so in the Mishnah it says that line, that one of the cases of someone who doesn't get to eat, who's not allowed to eat terumah, is a woman where two witnesses came and said, you sinned. Now, when did these witnesses come? If they came before she drank the Sotah waters, well then that's just a classic case of zonah. By zonah they mean a confirmed adulteress, right? This is simply, 10 commandments. And so she would just have all the consequences of someone who commits adultery, including, of course, not eating terumah, and much worse. So that can't be that's what we're talking about. That's of course as obvious. Rather, it must be she already drank, nothing happened to her, so we presume now she's innocent, she's not a Sotah anymore, and now the witnesses come. Now, what will be the consequences for the witnesses coming after Sotah? If you say that Sotah waters are not effective when there are witnesses, that's why we accept the witnesses when they come. But if you say that the Sotah waters are effective even when there are witnesses who are in a different country, well then we would not accept the witnesses, and we would say it's now revealed retroactively that these witnesses are false because she drank the Sotah waters. Sotah waters proved her innocent, therefore she is innocent, and these witnesses who came from who knows where must be false. We don't say that in this very Mishnah. That's why the Mishnah puts that line in, right? It would be obvious if witnesses came before she drank, of course she's a zonah. But rather, I'm talking about a case of after she drinks, and yet those witnesses will make her prohibited to drink terumah, means they are believed even after the Sotah waters did nothing. That proves that Sotah waters are ineffective when witnesses are in existence. Okay, beautiful. Now, Amar Rav Yosef is going to challenge Rav Sheshet and says, no, not necessarily. I can actually say that the waters are effective even when there are witnesses out there. The waters are effective, and one can say that zechut tola la. This is a very important concept. So important that it's in the Mishnah coming up in the third perek. That describes what happens to her. She, by the time before even she finishes drinking, if she's guilty, her face turns green, her eyes bulge, veins protrude, and they say take her out so she doesn't make the courtyard impure. Okay. However, im yesh la zechut, let's say she's a meritorious woman. Okay, even though she's guilty of committing adultery, so she's not the greatest tzaddiket in the world, but let's say she also did a lot of chesed, a lot of mitzvot, and she has a lot of merits otherwise. Well, that merit will make the punishment be delayed. We'll delay the punishment sometimes for a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes even 3 years. Okay, so that's the Mishnah over there. So now that we know that there is such a concept that zechut may delay something, so it could be that a woman will drink, nothing will happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she's innocent. It could be that she is guilty, but she has merit, and that's why nothing happens right away. So therefore, Rav Yosef says, even if there are witnesses elsewhere, he thinks that witnesses being elsewhere doesn't mean that the water is not effective. The Sotah waters are effective even if there are witnesses elsewhere. And so when the Mishnah talks about a case where witnesses come after she drank, wait a second, but if witnesses came after she drank, obviously she's innocent, right? Not necessarily, because she has merit, right? So it could very well be that it would work the Sotah waters would work, even though there are witnesses outside. And if she had no merit, then she would blow up. And the reason why she doesn't blow up is because she has merit. And when the witnesses come, in the meantime, right, she would have blown up at a year. But the witnesses come in 6 months, and so the witnesses say, "Listen, I know the one that with the waters didn't do anything yet, but they will, and we declare her guilty, so she is guilty." Okay. Now, that's Rav Yosef's position. Now, b'may kami palge, what's at the root of their machloket between Rav Sheshet and Rav Yosef? B'mit navena de Rabbi ditnan. Rabbi omer, zechut tola b'mayim hamarim, ve'ena yoledet, ve'ena mashbahat, ela mit navena ve'holechet. Lesof shehi meta be'ota mita. At root, or parallel to their machloket between Rav Sheshet, who said that my Sotah are not effective if there are witnesses in existence, and Rav Yosef, who says that the Sotah waters are effective even if there are witnesses in existence. That will depend on the deterioration opinion that Rabbi expresses. In the very next Mishnah, in the third Perek, it quotes the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who says that in a case where she has merit, and therefore the merit will delay the punishment, this is how it works. Right away, she won't be able to give birth, but she's not going to improve her condition. In fact, the opposite. She's going to start deteriorating immediately and deteriorate more progressively until at the end she will die the same blowing up death that a Sotah gets. So the B says her merit just helps her in that it delays the final punishment. And so she has no merit, she dies right away. Because of her great merit, she gets to suffer progressively until she gets the same awful death. Okay, I guess that's still a little bit better than dying right away. Okay, that's the opinion of Rabbi. Now, it doesn't say whether anyone agrees or disagrees with Rabbi. And so this is the machloket between Rav Sheshet and Rav Yosef. In other words, in order to maintain their opinion, they're going to have to say something about Rabbi's machloket. Rav Sheshet savar, ben Rabbi, ben Rabbanan havya, mit navena. Rav Sheshet is going to assume that everyone agrees with Rabbi, that she deteriorates slowly. That means that as soon as she drinks the Sotah water, if she is guilty, even if she has merit, you'll be able to tell right away. She may not die right away, but immediately you'll see her already starting to get a little bit disfigured. And so we would know she's guilty. Therefore, if nothing happens to her and she doesn't start to deteriorate, then we know she is innocent. And if there's witnesses that come from elsewhere and say after she drank, can't come and say she's guilty, we have to assume that they are wrong. If the Mayim Sotah would be effective. Therefore, Rav Sheshet says, no, it can't be. If there are witnesses elsewhere, then the Sotah waters don't work, right? Because otherwise we would know right away. So when the witnesses come afterwards and say, listen, she was guilty, then we'll know, oh, you know why the Sotah waters didn't work and it didn't start right away? Because there were external witnesses, and now that they came, we believe the witnesses. That's Rav Sheshet's opinion. Rav Yosef sabar l'Rabbi havya mit navena. Rabbanan lahavya mit navena. Rav Yosef says, no, this is the opinion only of the B that she begins to deteriorate immediately. According to the rest of the rabbis, they would disagree with the B, and they say, no, there's no immediate deterioration. Rather, if she has enough merit for 1 year, then she's totally fine, and then in 1 year, all of a sudden, she poof. So therefore, right when she drinks, it's not apparent whether she is guilty or not. We're going to assume that she is innocent until, if in case we'll see if something happens. Therefore, we can say, Rav Yosef can say, that the Sotah waters are effective, even if there are external witnesses. And so what happens if external witnesses come in 6 months and nothing happened with those Sotah waters? We can still believe them. And we'll say, wait a minute, but Sotah waters didn't work. Oh, that's because of she has merit. And you'll see in a few months from now, if the witnesses hadn't come, she would have blown up anyway. So that's why the Sotah waters didn't do anything, because of her merit. But if not for the merit, then the Sotah waters would have worked. And therefore, as if the witnesses come before the Sotah waters take effect, we believe the witnesses, and that's the basis of Rav Yosef. Okay, good. So now that we figured out that machloket, we're going to have another challenge against Rav Sheshat. Mativ Rav Shimi bar Asher, Rabbi Shimon Omer, en zechut tola b'mayim hamarim. So, also in consequence of the Mishnah we just quoted in the third Perek, there is one opinion that says there's such a thing as zechut tola, that the merit will delay her punishment, but Rabbi Shimon disagrees and says no such thing as merit delaying the punishment. If she's guilty, it's going to work right away, no matter what. And here's Rabbi Shimon's proof. If you would say that there is merit that delays, then you are weakening the sotah water before anyone who drinks it. Here we see a key to what the whole sotah is all about. The main goal of the sotah water is not that she should drink it, but rather that she should be afraid of drinking it, and therefore admit guilt. That if she's guilty, she'll admit guilt rather than go through the scary process and potentially blowing up and public shaming. So the whole thing is so that it should be a deterrent so that she will admit guilt. But if you teach people, and if it's true, right, it's interesting that Rabbi Shimon is deciding his position on what will work best, to convince people to admit if they're guilty, right? So he says, listen, if there is such a thing as merit that will delay, then women won't be scared to drink because they'll say, listen, I know I'm guilty, right? But I have some merit. So you know what? I'll drink and nothing bad will happen to me. I won't be publicly shamed. I'll be okay. And so we don't want people think. We want it to be as scary as possible. And therefore, can't be that there is merit. A further problem of your merit proposition is that you are causing, you're defaming women who drank and nothing happened to them, right? We thought all along that, according to the Rabbi Shimon, if you don't say anything about merit, once a woman drinks and nothing happens to her, she is good to go, right? We said we proved it, she's tahor. But now, according to your theory of merit, will say, she drank and nothing happened. But the people, the suspicious of her, will say, oh, maybe she just has merit. But in a year, then she'll blow up. And she's not totally cleared. People are going to still say negative rumors about her. That's a terrible thing. And so Rabbi Shimon says, I don't like this whole idea of there being merit. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says regarding Shimon's opinion. Now, Vim Ita, if you are Rav Sheshat, if this is right, יש לה עדים במדינת הים נמה, אתה מוציא שם רע על טהורות ששתו, והן אומרים, טמאות היו, אלא שיש להם עדים במדינת הים. You'll have the same problem, the second problem that he said, that if you say that anyone who has witnesses that exist in another country, the waters, the Sotah waters are not effective, well then, if a woman drinks and nothing happens, rather than say, okay, she's innocent, everybody will be gossiping and say, oh, I think she's still guilty, but you know why it didn't work? Because there's witnesses in that country, and then, one day they'll come and you'll see she's actually guilty, right? We'd rather have it be a final thing. It's a yes or no, without anything else. Okay, so you see, according to the Rabbi Shimon, and his logic here, his concern, that would certainly mean that Sotah waters are effective no matter what, even if there are witnesses elsewhere. That's a challenge to Rav Sheshat. And the answer is Rabbi Shimon kamat, Rabbi Shimon midizchut latalya edim name latalu. No, that's only according to Rabbi Shimon, right? For according to Rabbi Shimon, he also says that merit doesn't delay punishment, so he also says that witnesses don't delay it either. That the waters work no matter what. But that's only the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. We're talking about according to everybody else. Rav Sheshat is giving his opinion according to the other rabbis, most other rabbis who think that there is zechut tola. And they're not worried about this thing that people will say, right? People are gonna, if they see that she drank and nothing happened, people will assume the best. Mativ Rav, another challenge to Rav Sheshat by Rav. Ve'elu sheminchotehen nisrafot. We have a Mishnah here that says the following people that their Sotah brings a korban mincha. Right, before she drinks, she has to bring korban mincha, and that prepares the way. However, in the following two cases, the mincha offering has to be burnt because it's no good, it can't be used. So we have to burn it. Two cases are ha'omedet teme'ani v'sheba'u la'adim shehi teme'ah. The cases where, well, we'll see exactly the chronology in a second, but they're preparing this, the mincha, and then she admits, I'm guilty. So they're not going to go ahead with the Sotah waters. Since they're not going to go ahead with the Sotah waters, we don't need her korban mincha anymore. So you can't use it, and you can't just take it back home because it's holy already. So therefore you have to burn it. Or if witnesses come, right then, as we're preparing it, witnesses come and say she is guilty. So that's it. She doesn't have to drink anymore. So we abort the process. Even though we abort the process, the mincha is already holy. So you can't just take it back home. It has to be burnt in the Bet HaMikdash. Okay, Datu Edim Emat. Now these witnesses, exactly when did they come? If they came before this is barley that she brings, if it's before they became holy, right, we didn't put them yet in the vessel of the Bet HaMikdash, a holy vessel, so then, the witnesses came, okay, abort the process, where's the barley? We didn't make it holy yet. Fine, then let it be chulin, take it home and eat it tomorrow. Have some oatmeal. Ela debatat lebatat de kadush. Rather, it must be that the barley already was sanctified, meaning it was placed in the sacrificial vessel. If you say, like Rav Yosef's opinion, that the Sotah waters are effective, even though there are witnesses. We know there are witnesses because they're about to come, and that they are effective. Therefore, this barley is worthy of being sanctified, because she is going to go ahead. If, let's say, the witnesses are still away, they're in Brazil, right, on vacation, and they haven't come, and let's say they're not going to come, then, well, she can go ahead with the Sotah waters because they're going to be effective, and that means the mincha offering is a good offering, and therefore it becomes holy when put in the vessel, and it's going to be offered. V'chi kadush me'kadash shapir kadush, and when they were sanctified, they were validly sanctified. That's why when the witnesses come after the barley is sanctified, it was sanctified in a validly. So it really is sanctified. But now that the witnesses come, she doesn't have to drink the waters anymore. So now we abort the process. We're not going to continue with the mincha offering, so we have to burn it because it was sacrificed. So all that makes sense according to Rav Yosef. But now according to Rav Shashat, if you say that the Sotah waters are not effective when there are witnesses elsewhere, then once the witnesses come, it is revealed to us retroactively that when we put the barley in the bowl, it was a mistake. The whole sanctification was an error because the Sotah waters were themselves going to be ineffective. She cannot drink the Sotah waters. The whole process is not a real process if there are witnesses elsewhere. And therefore, even though we put it in the holy vessel, but if you just put something in a holy vessel for no reason, it was not a valid process to begin with, then take it back home. It doesn't actually become holy. And therefore, this is a challenge because the Mishnah said that it does become holy and you do have to burn it even when the witnesses come afterwards. So you see, this is a challenge to Rav Sheshat. Okay, Amar Rav Yehuda mediskarta kegon shezinta ba'azara dechi kadush meikara shapir kadush. Rav Yehuda says, I can still explain the Mishnah even according to Rav Sheshat's opinion. It's talking about where she committed adultery in the courtyard after she bought the barley. So, and the witnesses that come are for that adultery that happens afterwards. So the chronology is like this. Actually, she was innocent the whole time beforehand. And the husband accused her, made a sotah. She comes, she brings her barley offering. The Kohanim, they put the barley in the sanctified vessel. At that point, this will work. She is a bat sotah, right? Even if she's innocent, but the process of testimony went ahead. And she was secluded with a guy, but she never sinned with the guy. So she will be able to drink. And now the barley was put in there, and this is going to be a valid ceremony. So the barley is legitimately holy. However, at that point, after that point, I don't know how, she finds someone in the courtyard of the Bet HaMikdash where she is, and she sins, commits adultery with him, and the witnesses see her, and then the witnesses come, and at that point, no longer do we need to drink, and that's why we have to burn it. That's the case that Rav Sheshat could say this Mishnah is talking about, right? Okay, I guess it's possible. Matkif Rav Mishashia. Rav Mishashia says, no, that's impossible that she would sin while on the courtyard, because we're going to learn that when the husband comes and brings her to the Bet HaMikdash, and then the young Kohanim, they guard her, right? They want to make sure nothing happens. They want to make sure she's not with her husband, or with anybody else. And so if you have the guards there, so it can't be. How could she possibly then commit adultery at that point? And the answer is, well, maybe one of those young priests, they're supposed to be guarding her, but maybe they themselves gave in to temptation. All right, who's going to guard the guards? You need a guard for the guards. Okay, and so maybe she did in fact sin, and then someone, those are the witnesses. That's what we're talking about. Rav Ashi says, no, leave the Kohen, young Kohanim alone. We can trust them. Rather, it's talking about that she had to go to the bathroom, right? What do you think? The Pirkei Honah, do they lock her up in a cell that she can't be in private? She says, oh, listen, I have to go to the bathroom. She says, okay, fine. She goes to the bathroom. While she goes to the bathroom, she finds a way to commit adultery. So that's a different possibility. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so this is pretty unlikely. And so the Papa wants to go back to the original answer. The Papa amar leolam kedam dinan meikara. Ud kamar tepuk leholin midrabanan. Gezerah shema yomeru mosiin mekele shared lachol. The Papa says, I'm going to go back and answer that challenge that we had from before, that Rav, from Rav, right, all the way back here. And and you asked, the question was, if you have, Papa is going to answer, if you have this cholin, when did the witnesses come? They came after you put the barley in. And these are witnesses that were around the whole time. And so therefore, according to that, since the witnesses were around, but they were just away, therefore, the Sotah waters would be ineffective. And therefore, once the witnesses come, turns out retroactively that she never was these Sotah waters were going to be ineffective. That barley that you put in the vessel was actually chulin, and therefore, it never became kadosh. So you shouldn't have to burn it. So that Papa says that what you said, what you asked, well, let it be chulin. Why do you have to burn it? My answer is, the burning is only midrabanan. It's a gezerah. Because if people see, oh look, they took this barley from the sotah, they put it into the vessel, and then after the witnesses came, they took it out and took it back home and ate it for oatmeal tomorrow. And people are going to see that and say, oh, I guess even if it's in a vessel and you don't need it anymore, you can take it back home. But in general, that's not that law is not true. In general, if once you put it in, if it's a valid korban, and only later it turns out that's not needed, in general you have to burn it. And people will see this and see you take it home, and they'll think that that's the law. That in other cases also, you can take it home and it's chol, even though in most other cases it's actually has to be burnt. So Rav Papa says, really, this whole Mishnah is only midrabanan, and that's a simpler answer than saying that one of the young Kohanim who was guarding her himself sinned with her. Okay, that's Rav Papa's answer. We're going to challenge Rav Papa's answer from a long baraita. So we're going to see the question all the way at the end of the baraita. Mativ Rav Mari, nitmet minchata עד שלא קדשה בכלי, הרי היא ככל המנחות ותיפדה. מי שקדשה בכלי, הרי היא ככל המנחות ותישרף. Let's say a woman has a korban mincha, a sotah woman, and it becomes tameh. What are you going to do with it? Well, if it doesn't become kadosh, you didn't put it in the kli, in the vessel of the Bet HaMikdash yet, then it's like any other mincha offering in which case can be redeemed, right? You redeem the monetary value and you bring other grain instead. That's tahor. If it already went into the vessel and became kadosh, then it's like all other menachot, and you have to burn it. Kadash hakometz. Now, when you do what you do is you put it in the vessel, and then the kohen takes a fistful. Right, and that fistful will be offered on the mizbeach. Kadash hakometz. So if he already did that, and then that became holy, velo hispik lehakrivo ad shemet hu or ad shemeta hi, harehi kechol hamenachot vetisaref. And so he takes the kometz, but he didn't offer it on the mizbeach, and he didn't do it yet. And in the meantime, either the husband died or the wife died. Now, if one of them dies, then you don't go through with the rest of the sotah. So now you have this holy barley and the kometz that's supposed to be on the Bet HaMikdash, and there's not going to be any sotah ceremony. So what do? It's like all other menachot that no longer can be used. You burn it. Karav hakometz velo yispik le'echol shirayim ad shemet hu or ad shemet ahi hari kechol menachot ve'te'achel she'al hasafek bat metechila kipera sefeka ve'alcha la. However, if you finished the whole process of the mincha and you already took that kometz and you put it on the mizbeach, and at that point, usually the Kohanim can eat the leftovers of the barley. But let's say they didn't eat it yet, right? So the leftovers still sitting there, and the husband dies or she dies, and now they're not going to go through with the drinking of the sotah waters. In that case, it's like the same law with other menachot, and it still can be eaten, even though no one's going to drink the sotah waters. Nevertheless, that korban was a valid korban. Why? Because the korban in the first place only came as a doubt. We're not sure if she is guilty. Could very well be she was innocent the whole time. But nevertheless, this is a type of korban that comes because of someone that we don't know. It's like an asham talui, right? You bring that asham precisely because you're in doubt. So in this case, okay, it turns out she's not drinking the sotah water, but we only brought it in doubt in the first place. And it did its job. It's kippera, it atoned for the uncertainty, right? And it was uncertain. And then now it fulfilled its job. And at the next step, had they been alive, she would drink. But it's not. But we finished the korban. It did its job, and therefore the kohanim can go ahead and eat it. All this is not necessary for our question. Here's the end of the braita. Ba'u la'edim shehi teme'a minchata nisrefet. Nimseu edeha zomin minchata holin. If witnesses come and say she is guilty, then the meal offering has to be burnt. Or however, if the witnesses, meaning the original witnesses that saw her secluded, they turn out to be edim zomemin, right? Other witnesses come and say, you couldn't have seen her being secluded on Tuesday because you were with us in a baseball game in Boston. And turns out that she was never a sotah to begin with. In that case, that meal offering that she brought is holin. Take it back home. Even if you put it in the vessel, it's nothing because she was never a sotah to begin with. That's the braita. Our question is from this last phrase. You see, when the edim are zomamin, then it turns out she was never a sotah at all. So you take this flour, you take this barley, and it goes back to cholin. According to Rav Papa, in exact similar case that we saw before, even though technically midoraita it's cholin because the sotah water is never going to be effective. Over there, Rav Papa said we say midrabanan. We should make a gezerah because it looks like it's effective, and you've already put it in the vessel. So we don't want people to make a mistake. So therefore, it should be burnt. But over here, right, when it's not effective because she was never a sotah, here you say cholin. If it's drabanan, then although there's no reason for it to be burnt here, why don't you say it's drabanan here as well and burn it? And Papa has a simple answer. Edim zomamin kamat, ezim zomamin kala itlehu. In the case of conspiring witnesses, that has a lot of publicity. Everybody, this is a good story. Did you hear those witnesses that came? They weren't even there. They were in a baseball game in Florida. The whole thing was false. And since everybody knows that, everybody will know that that barley that they put in that vessel was never became sanctified by being put in the vessel, because there was no case of sotah at all. So since everybody knows that, no one's going to come to make a mistake and say, "Oh, look, they took a holy grain and they took it back home." No, they'll know in another case that if it actually becomes holy, then they have to burn it. And so that answers Rav Papa. Okay, even though until now we've been giving Rav Sheshet a very hard time, asking him a lot of questions, in the end we're going to show that there actually is a braita that supports Rav Sheshet. Tanya kevated Rav Sheshet velav mita'ameh. It supports Rav Sheshet, but not based on his reasoning, based on a different pasuk, not his source. Here's the pasuk: Tehora velo sheyesh la edim b'medirat hayam, u'Torah velo shetata la zechut hi velo sheyisu v'yitenu ba mozrot ba'levana. We're learning it from this pasuk here that says, if she was not guilty, v'im lo nitme'a ha'isha u'Torah hi v'niketa v'nizra'a zara. If after she drinks, if she had been innocent the whole time, so it says lo nitme'a, and it says u'Torah. You see that there's a doubling here, extra words. Once you say lo nitme'a, then you also have to say u'Torah he, and also both of these are extra. We're also going to learn from the extra vav, u'Torah he. So there's three things to learn from. Then she will be unharmed, and she will actually have seed, and she will be able to become pregnant. Okay, so what are these extra words? U'Torahi, according to this braita, tehora means that the sotah waters are not effective if there are witnesses overseas. So yes, if she's innocent, right, then she will bear a child. But the extra words come and say, hold on, only if she is totally tehora, really tehora, then she'll have a child. But not if there were witnesses overseas. Then, even though nothing happened with the water, she's not actually innocent, and she will not have child. So that's what we learned from this, that the sotah waters don't work if there are witnesses elsewhere. You see, the braita, this is exactly the lesson, the law of Rav Sheshet, and here the braita backs him up. Okay, good. U'Torah velo shetalta la zechut. From the extra vav, we will learn that the sotah waters will not be effective, at least not immediately, if she has merit. They will be delayed. So you see this will go against what we saw before in the name of Rabbi Shimon. We're going to ask about that in a second. And the word he, extra word, velo sheyisu v'yitenu ba mozrot ba'levana. If the weavers in the moonlight are discussing her, these are women who are up in the middle of the night and they're weaving and gossiping the whole night, and if they are talking about this woman, in other words, it's kind of common knowledge by the gossipers that everybody knows that she is guilty, this woman, as she committed adultery. If it's really public knowledge, then also the sotah waters may not work, and it doesn't mean that she is innocent. Okay, this is an interesting braita, because it means that the sotah ceremony is not quite falsifiable, right? There are many different excuses for why it may not work, and nothing will happen even if she is actually guilty. And one of them is when everybody knows that she's guilty, then it won't work. Okay, anyway, you see here a support for Rav Sheshet. And one last point, Rabbi Shimon, Nehi devav la darish. Okay, understand Rabbi Shimon, he doesn't have to learn anything from a vav. Right? Not everybody learns halachot from an extra vav, but everybody does learn from an extra word. So for the extra vav, we know Rabbi Shimon doesn't have the concept of merit delaying punishment for her. So fine, he's not gonna have that. But what about this, the tehora? Right? What are we gonna do with that? V'ha'ika yesh la'edim b'medinat hayam. Even Rabbi Shimon will have to agree that we have that word there. So he, although before we said Rabbi Shimon may disagree, but here we're saying, look, it's a braita. Rabbi Shimon's Otana also, but you have this word tehora, and therefore Rabbi Shimon should agree that the Sotah waters are not effective if there are witnesses elsewhere. And now we're going to bring up the question we had before. You, according to Rabbi Shimon, you were worried that if there's an excuse, then people will suspect a woman of being guilty even after the sotah, even after nothing happens when she drinks. And so if you say that when there are witnesses in Brazil, the sotah waters won't work, right? And now we just proved that this is a true law from a braita, then we're going to have a problem, because if a woman goes and drinks and nothing happens, still there'll be people that will mosi shemra and say she's really guilty, but there must be witnesses in Brazil. And what are you going to do with that, Rabbi Shimon? Because you were worried about that. And we answered, La shechicha, it's not common. How common is it that there were witnesses that saw it and they went to a different country? People didn't travel so much. And if they really saw it, they would come and they while they were home, and they would say something about it. So it's not common that we did this whole process and then all of a sudden, right, some months later, witnesses will come and say we saw it. Since it's so uncommon, therefore, it's not a problem of mosi shemra. People will see if she drinks it and nothing happens, everyone will say she's innocent. They're not going to worry about that far-fetched thing. Whereas, on the other hand, regarding the merit, everyone may have merit, right? Most people do a lot of good deeds, and so therefore that is a problem of people will say, oh, nothing happened, she's still guilty, but she had some merit, and just wait a year. So that, Rabbi Shimon didn't like that idea, so he rejected the concept of merit can suspend, but he could be totally fine with this halacha of Rav Sheshat, that if there are witnesses elsewhere, then the sotah waters are not effective. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen ve'amen.